Set. All right, that looks good. Hey, everybody. Oh, fuck, what I just do. All right. All right, so today, continuing on doing my American history deep dive, going into all the good fun stuff, reading some of the writings, and then I think after that, I'm going to do just some quick overview over the Wikipedia, going over the pre-years of the revolution. That's what I'm gonna do for tonight. And then when I'm done with that, maybe we'll play something. Yeah. Let's get that open. All right, Federalist number 7. All right, so last time, let's check my notes. Federalist Papers. All right, so this, in the last few, Alexander Hamilton was going over why there might be tensions between the states if they didn't agree to the Constitution. Because his whole argument here is that the federal government will reduce conflicts between the states, at least in these first 10. I don't know if we'll see if he goes into some different arguments later on, but yeah, he was not a big fan of the Articles of Confederation, but he was a big Constitution guy. Alexander Hamilton and John Jay have been the only ones writing in the first 10. All right, let's read number 7. I think I just want to do 7 and 8 before I move on to other histories, because these can get a little hard to read after a little bit. It is sometimes asked, with an air of seeming triumph, what inducements could the states have if disunited to make war upon another? It would be a full answer to question this to say precisely the same inducements which have at different times. I've read this one. I read number 7. This is the whole one I just fucking read. Yeah. All right, move on. Yeah, basically that one was like, first he steelmans, like, oh, all these people are saying, like, why would we have any wars or conflicts between each other? We have no reason to. We're like commercial aids. And he's like, countries have commercial connections all throughout history, and they still go to war with each other. That's not going to save us from some conflict within each other. All right, so number 8. The consequences of hostility between the states. All right, so now he's going to go, what are the downsides if we have this conflict between the states? Assuming, all caps, it therefore an established truth that the several states, in case of disunion, or such combinations of them as might happen to be formed out of the wreck of the general confederacy, would be subject to those vicissitudes of peace and war, of friendship, of enmity with each other, which have fallen the lot of all the neighboring nations not united under government. Let us enter into a concise detail of some of the consequences that would attend such situation. All right, so he's setting himself up. He's like, all right, so people are asking this. Let's get into some of these fucking details of what these horrible consequences could be. War between the states in the first period of their separate existence would be accomplished with much greater distress than it is commonly is their countries where regular military establishments. All right, I'm starting over. I gotta slow down. I can't fucking talk. War between the states in the first period of their separate existence would be accompanied with much greater distress than it commonly is in those countries where regular military establishments have long obtained. The disciplined armies always kept on foot on the continent of Europe, though they bear a malignant aspect to the liberty and economy, have notwithstanding been productive of the signal advantage of rendering sudden conquest impracticable, and of preventing that rapid desolation which used to mark the progress of war prior to the introduction. All right, so saying in Europe, they have these standing armies. They're very expensive. They hurt liberty and the economy, but they're always ready, and they're ready to go. The art of fortification has contributed to the same ends. The nations of Europe have encircled with chains of fortified places, which mutually obstruct invasion. Campaigns are wasted in reducing 2 or 3 frontier garrisons to gain admittance into the enemy's country. Similar impediments occur at every step to exhaust the strength and delay the progress of the invader. A lot of forts in Europe, all right. Formerly, an invading army would penetrate to the heart of the neighboring country almost as soon as intelligence of its approach could be received. But now a comparatively small force of disciplined troops acting on the defensive with the aid of post is able to impede and finally to frustrate the enterprises of one much more considerable. All right. So Europe has a lot of fortresses. It makes it harder to invade. Now you need bigger armies with bigger wars, and it's a lot more expensive. The history of war in that quarter of the globe is no longer a history of nations subdued and empires overturned, but of towns taken and retaken, of battles that decide nothing, of retreats more beneficial than victories, of much effort and little acquaintance. So the war in Europe are very indecisive and costly. In this country, the scene would be altogether reversed. Jealousy of military establishments would postpone them as long as possible. The want of fortifications leaving the frontiers of one state open to another would facilitate inroads. The populous states, with little difficulty, overrun their less populous neighbors. All right, since we wouldn't want to build all these forts and fortifications, the want to invade would be greater because it would be less costly. Conquest would be as easy as it is, would be easy to be made, as difficult to be retained. War, therefore, would be desultory and predatory. Plunder and devastation ever march to the train of irregulars. The calamities of individuals would make the principal figure in events which would characterize our military exploits. So the war here would be even worse because we don't have these defensive structures. This picture is not too highly wrought, though I confessed I would not long remain a just one. Safety from external danger is the most powerful director of national conduct. So threats are the most powerful director of the national conduct. So any threat to you is more likely to control your motives and actions than other things. Even the ardent love of liberty will after a time give way to dictates. So even though we love liberty and freedom, all that, like constant war would make that less important. The violent and destruction of life and property, incitement to war, the continual effort and alarm attendant on a state of continual danger will compel nations to the most attached to liberty to resort for response and security to instructions which have tendencies to destroy their civil and political rights. To be more safe, they at length become willing to run the risk of being less free. So because these states face danger, they run the risk of losing their freedoms. This was, a lot of the founding fathers had the same idea of this like lack of that being concerns with security could erode freedoms, which a lot of people made that as a lot of these same arguments happened like, after 9/11. The institutions chiefly alluded to are standing armies and the correspondent appendages of military establishments. Standing armies, it is said, are not provided against the new Constitution, and it is therefore inferred that they may exist under it. Their existence, however, from the very terms of the proposition, is at most probable and uncertain, but standing armies, it may be replied, must inevitably result from a dissolution of the Confederacy. So if you lose the Confederacy, it would become inevitable that all these separate armies would form. Frequent war and constant apprehension, which would require a state of as constant preparation, will infallibly produce them. The weaker states or confederacies would first have recourse to them, but put themselves upon equality with their more potent neighbors. They would endeavor to supply the inferiority of population and resources by more regular and effective systems of defense, by disciplined troops, and by fortifications. So they would start falling into the same traps that all these European nations have. They would, at the same time, be necessitated to strengthen the executive arm of their government, in doing which their constitution would acquire a progressive direction towards monarchy. It is of the nature of war to increase the executive at the expense of the legislative authority. So we would lose our legislative freedoms and increase our executive powers, which would, in his argument, reduce liberty. The expedients which have been mentioned would soon give to the states or confederacies that made use of them of a superiority over their neighbors. Small states or states of less natural strength under vigorous governments and with the assistance of disciplined armies have often triumphed over large states or states with greater natural strength, which have been destitute of these advantages. Neither the pride nor the safety of more important states or confederacies would permit them long to submit to this mortifying and advantageous superiority. They would quickly resort to means similar to those by which it had been effected to reinstate themselves in their lost preeminence. Thus, we should in a little time see establishment in every part of this country the same engines of despotism which have been the scourge of the old world. So he's saying that, with the dissolution of the Confederacy, they would all split into these little micro kingdoms that would be jealous of each other, and they would, by necessity, have to build defenses against each other, which would lead to more despotism. This, at least, would be the natural course of things, and our reasonings will be more likely to be just. In proportion, they are accommodated to this standard. These are not vague inferences drawn from supposed or speculative defects in constitution, the whole power of which is lodged in the hands of the people, or their representative and delegates, but they are solid conclusions drawn from the natural and necessity progress of human affairs. He says, I'm not guessing. This is evidence. I'm making evidentiary claims. It may perhaps be asked, by way of objection to this, why did not standing armies spring up out of the contentions which so often distracted the ancient republics of Greece? Different answers, equally satisfactory, may be given to this question. The industrial habits of the people of the present day, absorbed in the pursuit of gain and devoted to the improvements of agriculture and commerce, are incompatible with the condition of a nation of soldiers, which was the true conditions of the people of those republics. This means the means of revenue, which have been so greatly multiplied by the increase of gold and silver, and that of the art of industry, and the science of finance, which is the offspring of modern times, concurring with the habits of a nation, have produced an entire revolution in the system of war, and have rendered disciplined armies distinct from the body of the citizens, the inseparable companions of frequent hostility. So we're not the same people as the fucking ancient Greece. Like, that's a stupid comparison. That's what he's saying. There's a wide difference also between military establishments in a country seldom exposed by its situation to internal invasions, and in one which is subject to them and always apprehensive of them. The rulers of the former can have a good pretext, if they are even so inclined, to keep on foot armies so numerous must of necessity be maintained by the latter. So to have these armies, you by necessary have these big armies, necessarily have to give up. Okay, anyway, never mind. These armies being, in the first case, rarely, if at all, called into activity for internal defense. The people are in no danger of being broken to military subordination. The laws are not accustomed to relaxations in favor of military come on, Guru, I need the pronunciation help.
Exigency.
The demand. The civil state remains in full vigor, neither corrupted nor confounded with the principles and propensities of the other states. The smallness of an army renders the natural strength of the community an overmatch for it, and the citizens not habituated to look up to the military power for protection, or to submit to its oppressions. Neither love nor fear of the soldiery, they view them as the spirit of the jealous acquiescence in the necessary evil. They stand ready to resist the power which they suppose may be exerted to the prejudice of their rights. The army, under which circumstances may be useful aid to the magistrate to suppress a small faction or the occasional mob or insurrection, but it can be unable to enforce encroachment upon the united efforts of the great body of the people. So he says, we don't want an army that's big enough that it can fight the entire united efforts of the entire people. In a country in the predicament last described, the contrary of all this happens. The perpetual menacings of danger oblige the government to always be prepared to repel it. Its armies must be numerous enough for instant defense. So, like in these European countries that he's mentioned earlier, they have to have these large armies and defenses because they are in like constant danger of one of their neighbors attacking them. The continual necessity for these services enhance the importance of the soldier, and the proportionability degrades the condition of the citizen. So as these armies grow better, in proportion it degrades the citizen's, he calls condition or lifestyle or liberty or whatever you want to give an example to. The military state becomes elevated above the civil. The inhabitants of territories, often the theaters of war, are unavoidably subject to frequent infringements on their rights, which serve to weaken their sense of those rights. And by degrees, the people are brought to consider the soldiery not only as their protectors, but also their superiors. So these military states, he harps on this again, having a military state necessitates loss of liberty. The transition from despotism to that of considering disposition, not despotism, the transition from this disposition to that of considering the masters is neither remote nor difficult, but is very difficult to prevail upon a people under such impressions. To make a bold or effectual resistance to usurpations supported by military power. So he's saying it's not hard to make this transition from a like liberty country with a big military, but it is difficult if the people have the impression or the idea that that could happen. All right. The kingdom of Great Britain falls with the first description, an insular situation, a powerful marine guardian in a great measure against the possibility of foreign invasion. supersede the necessity of a numerous army within the kingdom. So Great Britain has the advantage of being a giant fucking moat. A sufficient force to make head against a sudden descent, till the militia could have time to rally and embody, is all that has been deemed requisite. No motive of national policy has demanded, nor would public opinion have tolerated, a larger number of troops upon its domestic establishment. So the people wouldn't accept a large army in Britain. There have been a long time past little room for the operation of other causes, which have enumerated the consequences of internal war. This peculiar felicity of situation in a great degree contributed to preserve the liberty which the country to this day enjoys, in spite of the prevalent venality and corruption. If, on the contrary, Britain has been situated on the continent, and had been compelled, as she would have been by that situation, to make her military establishments at home coextensive with those of the other great powers of Europe, she, like them, would in all probability, at this day, a victim to the absolute power of a single man. 'Tis is possible, though not easy, that the people of the island may be enslaved from other causes, but it cannot be from the powers of the army. All right. Armies increase the chance of despotism. It is by necessity that defense and armies lessen liberty. All right. If we are so wise enough to preserve the Union, we may for ages enjoy an advantage similar to that of an insulated situation. Europe is at great distance from us. Her colonies in our vicinity will be likely to continue to much disproportional in strength to be able to give us any dangerous annoyance. Extensive military establishments cannot, in this position, be necessary to our security. But if we should be disunited, the integral parts would be either remain separated, or, which in most probable, should be thrown together into 2 or 3 confederacies. We should be, in short course of time, in this predicament of continental powers of Europe. Our liberties would be a prey to the means of defending ourselves against the ambition and jealousy of each other. So if we split up into these tiny confederacies, or these medium-sized confederacies, it would only be a matter of time until we are just acting like these continental powers in Europe are. This is an idea not superficial or fertile, but solid and weighty. It deserves the most serious and mature consideration of every prudent and honest man of whatever party. If such men will make a firm and solemn pause, and meditate dispassionately on the importance of this interesting idea, if they contemplate it at all its attitudes and trace it to all its consequences, they will not hesitate to part with trivial objections to the Constitution, the rejection of which would in all probability put a final period to the Union. The airy phantoms that flit between distempered imaginations of some of its adversaries would quickly give place to the more substantial forms of dangers, real, certain, and formidable. All right, so he's making a straight-up call-out to people objecting to the Constitution. Like, if you just stopped and thought about it for a second, stopped being an emotional little bitch, you would agree with me. All right, I think I can do 2 more. I'm going to get through the first 10. I'm going to get through the first 10 today. That's what I'm going to do. Y'all believe in me, right? All right, fellas, number 9. Alexander Hamilton again. The utility of the Union as a safeguard against domestic faction and insurrection. All right. So how is union going to safeguard us against internal factionalism and insurrection? A firm union will be of the utmost moment to the peace and liberty of the states, as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection. It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the distractions with which they were continually agitated, and at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. All right, so he's probably going to make an analogy here of these like loose confederations and how they're always just like flying back and forth with each other, going back and forth from one extreme to the other, because they have no centralization at all between them. If they exhibit occasional calms, these only serve as short-lived contracts to the furious storms that are to succeed. So any of the calm time, these are the exceptions, not the rules. Any calm time in these places. If now and then intervals of felicity open to view, we behold them with a mixture of regret arising from reflection that the pleasing scenes before us are soon to be overwhelmed by the tempestuous waves of sedition and party rage. If momentary rays of glory break forth from the gloom, while they dazzle us with transcendent and fleeting brilliancy, they at the same time admonish us to lament that the vices of government would pervert the direction and tarnish the luster of those bright talents and exalted endowments from which favored soils that produce them have been so justly celebrated. So he's kind of talking shit on these like little crappy republics and confederacies, that every time we see like some peaceful union like and good times coming, which it's more sad than a good thing, because we know it's just like a pause in the chaos. From the disorders that disfigured the annals of those republics, and advocates of despotism have drawn arguments not only against the forms of republican governments, but against the very principles of civil liberty. They have decried all free governments as inconsistent with the order of society, and have indulged themselves in malicious exultation over the friends and partisans. Happily for mankind, stupendous fabrics, reared on the basis of liberty, which have flourished for the ages, have in few glorious instants refuted their gloomy sophisms, and I trust America will be the broad and solid foundation of all other edifices, not less magnificent, which will equally permitted monuments in their errors. He's like, we're different. We're not one of these shitty, fake bullshit confederacies. We're a fucking real republic with broad soldiers that can take on the problems. But it is not to be denied that the portraits that they have sketched of republican governments were too just copies of the originals from which they were taken. If it had been found impracticable to have devised models of a more perfect structure, the enlightened friends to liberty would have been obliged to abandon the causes that species of government as indefensible. The science of politics, however, like most other sciences, has received great improvement. So we're not living in the same times as the fucking ancient Greece. Things have changed since then. The efficacy of various principles is now well understood, which were either not known at all or imperfectly known to the ancients. The regular distribution of power to district departments, the introduction of legislative balances and checks, the institution of courts composed of judges holding their offices during good behavior, the representation of people in the legislators by deputies of their own election. These are wholly new discoveries, or have made principal progress towards perfection in modern times. So we've come a long way since ancient Greece. They are means and powerful means by which excellencies of republican government may be retained and its imperfections lessons to be avoided. To this catalog, circumstances that tend to the amelioration of popular systems of civil government. I shall venture, however, novel as it may appear to some, to add one more on the principle which made the foundation of an objection to the Constitution. I mean the enlargement of the orbit within which such systems are to resolve, either in respect to the dimensions of a single state or the consolidation of several smaller states into one great confederacy. The latter, that which immediately concerns the object under consideration. It will, however, be of use to examine the principle and its application to a single state, which shall be attended to in another place. All right. Just setting up his argument now. The utility of a confederacy, as well to suppress faction and to guard the internal tranquility of the states, as to increase the external force and security. It is in reality not a new idea. So the idea of confederacies will reduce factionalism but still be strong enough to guard against external threats. This is not a new idea. It has been done before. It has been practiced upon in different countries and ages, and has received the sanction of the most approved writers on the subject of politics. The opponents of the plan proposed have with great
assiduity
cited and circulated the observations of some French guy on the necessities of contracted territory for republican government. But they seem not to have been appraised of the sentiments of the great man expressed in another part of the work, nor have adverted the consequences of the principles to which they subscribed with such ready acquiescence. So these people, they're looking out all the bright parts. They're not looking at the problems that these things usually face. Boop, boop, boop. When Montesquieu recommends a small extent for republics, the standards he had in view were dimensions far short of the limits of almost every one of these states. Neither Virginia, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, North Carolina, nor Georgia can by any means be compared with the models from which he reasoned and to which the terms of his descriptions apply. So these states, these are not what Montesquieu were writing about. If we therefore take his ideas on point as the criticism of truth, we shall be driven to the alternative, either of taking refuge at once in the arms of monarchy, or of splitting ourselves into infinity of little jealous, classing, tumultuous commonwealths, the wretched nurseries of unceasing discord, and the miserable objects of a universal pity and contempt. Some of the writers who have come forward on the other side of the question seem to have been aware of the dilemma, and have even been bold enough to hint at the division of the larger states as a desirable thing. Such an infatuated policies, such a desperate expediences, might, by the manipulations of petty offices, answer the views of men who possess the qualifications to extend their influence beyond the nearest circles of personal intrigue, but it could never promote the greatness or happiness as the people of America. So he's talking shit on these people that are on the other side of the argument. He's like, they even mention the problems, but they act like, oh, it's not a big deal. Like, it might be a good thing that all these like conflicts between us is constantly happening. Hamilton's talking mad shit. Referring the examination of the principle itself to another place. As has been already mentioned, it would be sufficient to remark here that the sense of the author who has been most emphatically quoted upon the occasion, it would only dictate a reduction in the size of the more considerable members of the Union, but would not militate against their being all comprehended in one of the Confederate governments. And this is the true question in the discussion of what we are at present interested. So far, are suggestions of Montesquieu from standing opposition to a general union of the states, that he explicitly treats of Confederate Republic as the expedient for extending the sphere of popular government and reconciling the advantages of monarchy with those of republicanism. So he's like, Montesquieu doesn't apply here. They're all talking about Montesquieu, but he's not talking about what we're we're doing, that Confederate republics are just a way to extend the sphere of popular government. And these are places that are trying to combine monarchy with republicanism, not be a republic. It is very probable, says he, that mankind would have been obliged at length to live constantly under the government of a single person, had they not contrived a kind of constitution that has the interval advantages of a republican, together with an external force of a monarchical government, I mean a Confederate republic. This form of government is a convention by which several smaller states agree to become members of a larger one, which they intend to form. It is a kind of assemblage of societies that constitute a new one, capable of increasing by means of new associations, till they arrive at such a degree of power as to be able to provide the security of the united body. A republic of this kind, able to withstand the external force, may support itself without any internal corruptions. The form of society prevents all manner of inconveniences. If a single member should attempt to usurp the supreme authority, he could not be supposed to have an equal authority and credit in all the Confederate States. Were he to have a great influence over one, this would alarm the rest. Were he to subdue a part, that which could still remain free might oppose him with forces independent of those which he had usurped and overpowered, before he could be settled into his usurpation. All right, so he's still just giving descriptions of this type of confederation. Should a popular insurrection happen in one of the Confederate states, the others are able to quell it. Should abuses creep into one part, they were formed by those that remain sound. The state may be destroyed on one side and not on the other. The Confederacy may be dissolved, and the Confederates preserve their sovereignty. As this government is composed of small republic, enjoys the internal happiness of each, and with respect of its external situation, it is possessed by means of association of all the advantages of large monarchies. All right, so this was just a big-ass fucking quote of Montesquieu. I have thought it proper to quote at length these interesting passages, because they contain a luminous abridgment of the principal arguments in favor of the Union, and must effectively remove the false impressions by which misapplication of other parts of the work was calculated to make. Oh, so he's going to turn around this whole Montesquieu quote. They have at the same time an intimate connection with more immediate designs of this paper, which is to illustrate the tendency of the Union to repress domestic factions and insurrection. All right. A distinction more subtle than accurate has been raised between confederacy and consolidation of the states. The essential characteristic of the first is said to be the restriction of its authority to the members in their collective capacities, without reaching to the individuals of whom they are composed. It is contended that the national council ought to have no concern with any object of internal administration. An exact equality of suffrage between the members has always been insisted upon as a leading feature of Confederate government. These positions are, in the main, arbitrary. So these distinctions, they don't really matter. They are supported by neither principle nor precedent. So there's no evidence for this. It has indeed happened that governments of this kind have generally operated in the manner which the distinction taken notice of, supposed to be inherent in their nature, but there have been in most of them extensive exceptions to the practice. So if we look at history, this fantasy confederations, they don't really exist, which serve to prove, as far as an example would go, that there is no absolute rule on the subject. And it will be clearly shown in the course of this investigation that as far as the principle contended for has prevailed, it has been the cause of incurable disorder and imbellicacy to the government. All right. The definition of a confederated republic seems simply as an assemblage of societies or an association of two or more states into one state. The extent, modifications, and objects of the federal authority are mere matters of discretion, so long as the separate organizations of the members be not abolished, so long as it exist by the constitutional necessity for local purposes, though it should be in perfect subordination of the general authority of the Union, it would still be, in fact, in theory, an association of states or a confederacy. Oh, I don't think I'm getting through 10 tonight. The proposed constitution, so far from implying the abolition of the state governments, makes them constituent parts of a national sovereignty by allowing them a direct representation in the Senate, and leaves their possession of certain exclusive and very important portions of sovereign power. This fully corresponds with every rational import of terms with the idea of federal government. So the Constitution is superior to the Confederation because it still gives the rights of that the Confederacy want without all the weaknesses. In the Lycan Confederation, which consisted of 23 cities or republics, the largest were entitled to 3 votes in the Common Council, those of the middle class to 2, and the smallest to 1. The Common Council had the appointment of all judges and magistrates to their respective cities. This was certainly the most delicate species of interference in their internal administration. For if there be anything that seems exclusively appropriated to the local jurisdictions, the appointment of their own officers. Yet Montesquieu, speaking of this association, says, "Were I to give a model of excellent Confederate republic, it would be of Lycia." Thus we perceive the distinctions that insisted upon were not within the contemplations of enlightened civilization, and we shall be led to conclude that if the novel refinements of erroneous theory. Bam. So he's like, why are we even quoting fucking Montesquieu? Look at this dumb shit he said. He's saying that the head of the Confederacy, the big council, should appoint legislators. It's like, no, this is what the local government should be doing. This is expressly what they should be doing. All right. Number 9. All right. There. Done with did my Federalist Streets, and I do number 10 tomorrow. Let's do some more fun history. Do some Wikipedia research. We did that. The Townsend Acts and the Tea Acts. This is probably going to be... No, we still got the Intolerable Acts. And then we go on to... All right. I got the Townsend Acts and the Tea Act. All right. I'll get my notes for shitty taxes and laws from the British. All right, the British passed the Townsend Acts. All right. Townsend duties were a series of British acts that introduced a series of taxes and regulations to enable the administration to the British colonies. They were named Oh, there's 5 of them. Okay. Townsend Acts. I don't think I need to go into details of all of these. 5 more. Were they just taxes on a lot of stuff? Import taxes on American goods. That's as much as we need for this. There's more. We have a whole list of fucking horrible, shitty British taxes. All right, we got a whole page of notes just on shitty fucking British taxes, which placed duties on several staple goods, paper, glass, tea, and established the Board of Customs in Boston to more rigorously execute trade regulations. Okay, this is another important point. Because a lot of these taxes, they weren't enforced very thoroughly, so the colonists didn't care about. So, like, even though they were constantly, like, adding these taxes, they really didn't affect most people because they could just get around it or not pay it. The new taxes were enacted on the belief that Americans only objected to internal taxes and not external taxes, such as custom duties. However, in his widely read pamphlet, Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, John Dickinson argued against the constitutionality of the acts because their purpose was to raise revenue and not regulate trade. Colonists responded to the taxes by organizing new boycotts. These boycotts were less effective, however, as the goods taxed by the Townshend Acts were widely used. Okay. Boycotts followed. Ineffective. In 1968, Assembly at the Massachusetts Bay Colony issued a circular letter to the other colonies urging them to coordinate resistance. Events after Townshend Acts organized resistance started between colonies. Boston started it, of course. All right. A riot broke out in Boston in 1968 over the seizure of the sloop Liberty, owned by John Hancock, for alleged smuggling. I didn't know John Hancock was a smuggler, but that makes so much fucking sense. Custom officials were forced to flee, prompting the British to deploy troops in Boston. A Boston town meeting declared that no obedience was due to parliamentary laws and called for the convening of a convention. A convention assembled, but only issued a mild protest before dissolving itself. In 1969, Parliament responded to the unrest by reactivating the Treason Act of 1543, which called for the subjects outside the realm to face trials for treason in England. The governor of Massachusetts was instructed to collect evidence of said treason. The threat caused widespread outrage, though it was not carried out. Wow, another tab for another shitty British law that pissed off everyone. This is going to be really long by the end of this, I feel like. Activated the Treason Act of 1543, which pissed off everyone again. All right. In 1770, a large crowd gathered around a group of British soldiers in the Boston streets. The crowd grew, threatening, throwing snowballs, rocks, and debris at them. One soldier was clubbed and fell. There was no order to fire, but the soldiers panicked and fired into the crowd. They hit 11 people. 3 civilians died at the scene of the shooting, and 2 died shortly after. The event quickly became called the Boston Massacre. Very famous. The soldiers were tried and acquitted, defended by John Adams. If you ever watch the John Adams show, that's actually really good. It's really good. But the widespread description soon began to turn colonial sentiment against the British. This accelerated downward spiral in the relationship between British and provincial Massachusetts. And these troops were only there because people were ignoring their tariffs, and the British were like, oh, well, we're going to send troops there. And they're like, well, don't send troops here. This will go under events. Boston Massacre. I don't need to go type a lot for that. Everybody knows about the Boston Massacre. Well, maybe if I should spell massacre right. What the fuck? Oh, I'll only put one S. It's like yelling at me like, you didn't spell this right. The new ministry, Lord North, came to power in 1770. Parliament repealed most of the Townshend duties, but not all, except for the tax on tea. And the boycott of the British goods largely ceased, but only the more radical patriots, such as Samuel Adams, continued to agitate. In 1772, American patriots, including John Brown, he was a merchant and a smuggler, burned a British warship that had been vigorously enforcing the unpopular trade regulations. It would be known as the Gaspee Affair. The affair was investigated for possible treason, but no action was taken. I forgot about the Gaspee Affair. Gaspee. A lot is fucking happening right now. I take a lot of notes. Burnt a Brit ship. Because they were pissed. In private letters, 1773, private letters were published in which Massachusetts Governor Thomas Hutchinson claimed that the colonists would not enjoy all English liberties, in which Lieutenant Governor Andrew Oliver called for the direct payment of colonial officials, which had been paid by local authorities. This would have reduced the influence of colonial representations over their government. The letter's contents were used as evidence of a systematic plot against American rights and discredited Hutchinson in the eyes of the people. The Colonial Assembly positioned for his recall. Ben Franklin, our man, Postmaster General for the colonies, acknowledged that he leaked the letters, to which led him to being removed from position. What a fucking boss. He was like the WikiLeaks of his fucking day. All right. Ben Frank. WikiLeaks. The mass government. Private letters. In Boston, Samuel Adams set about creating a new Committee of Correspondence, which linked patriots in all 13 colonies and eventually provided the framework for the rebel government. Virginia, the largest colony, set up its Committee of Correspondence in 1773, on which Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson served. A total of about 7,000 to 8,000 patriots served on these committees. Loyalists were excluded. The committees became the leaders of the American resistance to the British actions and largely determined the war effort at a state and local level. The First Continental Congress decided to boycott British products. The colonial and local committees took charge, examining merchant records and publishing the names of merchants who attempted to defy the boycott. So they were like, snitches get stitches. Meanwhile, Parliament passed the Tea Act. All right, we got another shitty law or tax from the British government. I think we're closing in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is 10th, and some of these are more than one. Like the Townshend Acts were 5. And this is all in like a 50-year period. or less. A lot of these are within like a 10-year period. All right, Tea Act. It lowered the price of the taxed tea exported to the colonies to help the East India Company, since they were doing so shitty. They were about to go under. To undersell the smuggled, untaxed Dutch tea, which most of the colonists were doing, because they were like, fuck this stupid tea. We'll just buy it from the Dutch illegally. Special consignees? Is it consignees? Oh, I'm not watching an ad. I'm just go with consignees. Were appointed to sell the tea to bypass colonial merchants. The act was opposed by those who resisted the taxes and also by smugglers who stood to lose business. Of course, the smugglers wouldn't want to lose business to new tea coming in. And every colonial demonstrates warned merchants not to bring tea that included the hated new tax. In most instances, the consignees were forced by the Americans to resign the tea and turn back. The Massachusetts Governor Hutchinson refused to allow Boston merchants to give in to the pressure. A town meeting in Boston determined that the tea would not be landed and ignored the demand from the governor to disperse. On December 16th, a group of men by led Samuel Adams, dressed to evoke the appearance of indigenous people, boarded the ship and dumped 10,000 worth of tea, approximately $636,000, into the Boston harbor. Decades later, this event became known as the Boston Tea Party. The act. Boston Harbor was protest against people trying to bypass boycotts. All right. We got some more shitty taxes and laws. The Intolerable Acts. There's 4 laws. Restricted town meetings. Trials to be held in Britain. The third was the Boston Port Act, which closed the port of Boston. The fourth was the Quartering Act, which allowed royal governors to have British troops, and the Quartering Act. Whatever. I know what I meant. All right. So 4 more acts to our big list of shitty taxes and laws passed by the British government against the colonies. And this one made it into the Bill of Rights later because this pissed off so many fucking people. In response, Massachusetts patriots issued the Suffolk Resolves and formed the alternative shadow government known as the Provincial Congress. Ooh, I like shadow government. Ooh. I'm going to put that in my notes. The first in 1774, this provincial congress had the first continental congress, which maybe I'll go into another time. Consisted of a representations from each colony to serve as a vehicle for deliberation and collective action. During secret debates, conservative Joseph Galloway proposed the creation of a colonial parliament that would be able to approve or disapprove acts of the British Parliament. But his idea was tabled in a vote 6-5, which subsequently removed it from the record. Congress called for a boycott beginning in 1774 of all British goods. It was enforced by local committees authorized by Congress. It also began coordinating patriot resistance by militia, which existed in every colony, but which had gained military experience in the French and Indian War. For the first time, the patriots were armed and unified against Parliament. Military hostilities began. All right, this is where I'm going to take up tomorrow, because I want to make a map of the 13 colonies. So before I get into the military stuff, I think what I'll do tomorrow is I want to make a map, like a pretty big detailed map. I don't know if I can find like some program or website to do this on, but I want to map the whole military campaign as we read through it. So to get a nice like visual representation as we're reading about it to help keep things in mind. But all right, so we got through the pre-war stuff, got our notes on the pre-war stuff. So I think starting tomorrow, I'm gonna have to get up early tonight. I gotta go to wake up early tomorrow. But starting tomorrow, I'll do one more Federalist paper, and then we'll start on the actual war. So if you want to watch that, throw me a follow, and I'll be on tomorrow night, and we'll go into the fun stuff, the when the shooting starts. All right, y'all have a good one.